You are listening to Geopolitics and Empire. As always, support the Renegade transmission, and the best way you can do that is through the Substack. You can donate through the website. Also, we're on Supercast and Apple subscriptions where you can subscribe to listen ad-free to the podcast. A great way to support me as well. Check out the affiliates. We've got great guests today. Returning to the pirate signal are Patrick Wood and Courtney Turner to discuss their smashing new book that I just finished reading, The Final Betrayal. Welcome, friends.
Thank you.
Really, really good to be on with you. This, in particular, this day, I made a joke before air about empire and geopolitics. Your time has come. Ours as well. We're going to have to talk some interesting things here about what's going on with the North American technate and things at Davos and the new Pax Silica declaration. Oh boy,
our AI empire.
our time has come, and yeah, you mentioned AI empire. I just mentioned her in my weekly analysis. I forget her name. I got her book on my desk.
Karen
Ho, and in a recent interview she gave, and she was on point. She basically explained. We'll get into that, but how it's an empire because they're taking their resources, land, water, electricity, and it's like that's literally what empires of old have done. But maybe just to kick off. With your book, the why and the what of the Final Betrayal.
Exactly. Do I have the book?
Yes.
This is it
right here. Yay!
I know. Here, the skull. There's no crossbones, but the skull is breaking a window or a glass pane. And this is when I say this is the final betrayal. I don't think we're going to have a chance for another one, at least not from here. Because how can you betray something that's already been betrayed? That doesn't make sense. Yes, what happened in the election in 2024, nobody expected. Nobody but anybody in the populist movement, even in the liberal movement, they had no clue what was going to happen when Trump was inaugurated. That was a betrayal of the highest order, in my opinion. That was not just broken promises; it was an outright betrayal. And we have documented this now in our book, "The Final Betrayal: How Technocracy Destroyed America." And even if it doesn't, and somebody will say, "Well, technocracy, blah blah blah," they just can't do that. Well, even if they just destroy a part of the world, we're still left behind to pick up the hubris. So, go figure. But this has been a wild, wild ride for me, especially. And Courtney, she hitched herself to my train. She may regret it in the end, but I'm glad she's here. But she's documenting everything we're talking about for sure. So crazy.
And I'm just curious before going further. Someone asked me this today if I use AI. I'm like, I don't. I mean, I use it to generate images and to make summaries. And I'm just curious if you guys used AI or any such tools to aid you in the composition of the book, as well as your thoughts on its use.
Personally, I do not. I'm very careful on any word that comes out of AI's mouth because it could be the wrong word. One word can change the context of a sentence or a whole paragraph. And if you miss it, you can be tricked, so to speak, into saying something that you didn't want to say. So yes, I use AI to look up facts, maybe check definitions, stuff like that, pronunciations of words, and that's about it. But to write major papers, that's really risky.
Oh yeah. I'll say so. We do use AI for certain things. So like we kept getting slapped with the copyright on music for the podcast, and so we now use AI for the music because there's no copyright issues on that. So that has saved doesn't really save time. I mean, it takes a lot of time, and we use multiple AIs just to do that. We compare them against each other. We have to craft the gist of the lyrics. So we basically have to write, it's huge prompts and certainly graphics. Again, the same thing for the podcast, like graphics and stuff. We do use AI because you still have to pay for all the platforms, but it's cheaper than hiring a person to do, that. And we don't have the time to do it. We still have to do a lot of the raw graphic, but then to tweak it, we do work with AI for that. In terms of research, I would never have AI write anything because I agree. It's like one word changes the whole context. And if you're not like super careful, it's you're not, it's going to completely misrepresent you. But I also find that I have used it for research, and I find that it takes things rhetorically. And a lot of what I do is philosophically oriented. And so it's not going to catch the veilcraft. If you're taking something rhetorically, then you're just taking the literal words. So they might use the words that sound right, but that the meaning has been completely veilcraft is the word they use. It's like using the rhetoric that sounds like what you want to hear, but the meaning has been completely hollowed out or inverted. And I find that all the time. But what it's great for is sometimes if I'm doing research, it'll help me to find leads. So like if I'm looking for various sources and information, it's an aggregator. So kind of like what maybe Drudge Report used to do, or Google used to be better at this than it is now. But I could go and I could look and ask it to pull up a bunch of articles on a specific topic. And then I go and do the research, reading those articles. But I wouldn't necessarily be able to find them without having that initial kind of lead. So it's a computer. Essentially, it's an aggregator. It's like it computes. So it's like a calculator, can do fast kind of computation. But yeah, I wouldn't trust it for anything more than that. I'd spent a lot of time arguing with it, actually. So
yeah, and I use Canva for art, as you mentioned, which is fine, and that's replaced Fiverr.
Yeah,
and
we do that too.
And so I guess to get into your book, I'll be jumping around. I won't be going chronologically because there's just so much going on. To get your thoughts on the game plan here, and maybe to start with the underpinning ideology or theology of the regime, the Dark Enlightenment. You write in the book, it's the polar opposite of the MAGA movement. Anti-democratic, anti-freedom, anti-liberty, anti-human, thoroughly technocratic. Behind it, it's a twisted philosophy created by the tech bro from Silicon Valley named Curtis Yarvin. He's been on the podcast circuit recently, and I haven't had time, but I bookmarked some of his recent interviews he's been giving in the past few weeks because we got to study these people and essentially what they're calling for with the ideology. And I don't think he's not the only one putting that stuff out there. You guys also talk about Nick Land, but basically he's trying to make the case for a neo-feudal city states where they are our techno-feudal lords. So if you want to tell us a bit about this underpinning ideology.
Yeah, go for it, Courtney.
So the Dark Enlightenment was actually coined by Nick Land. He wrote the manifesto, Dark Enlightenment, in 2012, which basically was a footnote to Curtis Yarvin and quoted mostly his works that he's been blogging under the pseudonym Mencius Molebug since 2007. He was writing Unqualified Reservations. He now has a newer one called Gray Mirror, which I often wonder if it's just like a nod to Black Mirror. I don't know. So he essentially thinks that we should have a dissolution of geographical nation states in favor of these kind of similar to like what Balaji Srinivasan talks about with his network states. And in fact, Curtis Yarvin has his own network state. It's called Urbit, and Peter Thiel heavily invested in Urbit through his Tlon company. And he says that we should have CEO-style monarchs be our dictator to run our startup companies, and therefore we should not have countries anymore. So he says essentially that we have the world is run by what he calls the cathedral. So it's this idea that the media and entertainment and academia are running the world. And, to some extent, there's some validity there. And of course, he pins everything on the left. It's the left, which is kind of ironic because you look at this whole new right movement, which was largely funded by Thiel. All of them are former commies. like that you go down the list, they're former commies. So this new right, quote unquote right, doesn't seem to have much ideological roots in conservatism, certainly not. And as you mentioned, the Dark Enlightenment is completely antithetical to all the founding principles of the United States and completely antithetical to our constitutional principles and laws. But yeah, he thinks instead of this cathedral, that we should have neocameralism. So essentially, we will be run like a company. And he was very upset. He wrote this blog under the Gray Mirror. He wrote this blog saying how he was so excited for Trump to come back and that he was going to become a CEO and he was going to, take the reins and be a complete dictator. And he was very upset that, Trump didn't go far enough, although he's completely deregulated AI. He's laid this, entire political infrastructure through all these policies and executive orders and regulatory infrastructure to set up this technocracy. But he hasn't gone far enough. And Curtis Yarvin actually threatened that he was going to leave the country. He has not done so, obviously, but he did threaten because, we have not gone far enough, that's what he should do. Nick Land, who did, he's been writing much longer, and he did coin this Dark Enlightenment philosophy, which is a nod to the Enlightenment and a counter, right? This is what Elon Musk, when he came out on stage wearing the dark MAGA hat and said he's dark Gothic MAGA, I think that's what that was all about. And I think it was a nod to this whole idea of the higher elves that Curtis Yarvin talks about, and how the higher elves need to seduce, the dark elves need to seduce the higher elves. That's what it was. And I think that's essentially what that was a nod to. But Nick Land has been writing since 1993. He started the CCRU, which was a cybernetic culture research unit, which was out of the philosophy department of Warwick University. And his partner in that was Sadie Plant, who is a cyberpunk neo-feminist. And he has a very explicitly post-human philosophy. He coined the accelerationist movement. And he started out, there was a schism, left accelerationism, right accelerationism. Now it's just effective accelerationism. But this is the ethos of we have to move fast and break things. And if we're not breaking things, we're not moving fast enough. And he came from the Marxist framework. He was a disciple of Guattari and Deleuze. And he talked about extraterritorialism. And so he believed that, capitalism was this alien force that was destined to reach an apocalyptic state, but we should use technology to push it to the apocalyptic state and to achieve this essentially, post-extinctionist kind of world where, humans no longer exist. But they've reframed the word humanity, which is very confusing for a lot of people. I don't think they realize that a lot of these tech bros, when they're talking about humanity, they're not talking about Homo sapiens, and they're not talking about us. They are talking about a world where this AI, or the Borgs, or some sort of in the transition will be a transhuman kind of, biodigital convergence figure, but ultimate leading to a true post-human. But when they say humanity, they mean the things, the AI that humans have created, which will supersede. Of course, they don't think they're going to go anywhere. They're going to be immortal, live forever. But yeah, so he's it's a very kind of post-human philosophy. Although Curtis Yarvin he has his infamous quote where he says that the most humane alternative to genocide is to virtualize humans. So
yeah, I want to get further thought on that. But you mentioned Balaji. I was going to ask this later. I'll insert it here. Yeah. The question of and there's so many synonyms for the same thing, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree, but cyber states, network states, you've got freedom cities, private cities, 15-minute cities. My city, Guadalajara, is a resilient city, so I live in a 15-minute city. Even the Liberland project, Vit Jedlička, who I hung out with and interviewed a couple years back in Acapulco, I just saw on the feed today, he's saying, Liberland just got injected with, I think, 40 million the capital, and it's going to be blockchain governance. And for me, I put all of those in the same pot. And there have been other people amongst us, like in the podcast space, like Sterling Lujan, who I've interviewed. But he's pushing cyber states as having the potential to be a good thing. I just don't see anything good from any of these systems. So just thoughts on.
I'll say something and then I'll let Patrick run with this. But yeah, so I have a bunch of things to say on that. I did write an article. I didn't capture all of them, but I outlined all of these. The C40 cities is another one. That's the UN's, right? That's what will be connected for the AI World Society. And I've talked to Luan. He is, I don't know that he officially will identify this way, but he's a proponent of Game B, and he's very involved in that community. And that is essentially what he's advocating is network states. And my concern with a lot of these people is I think their heart is in the right place. I think they think they're fighting for freedom, but what they're doing is this banner of techno-libertarianism is actually what's creating this, again, you can call it all sorts of things, a beast system, if you will. But, essentially they see it as being a bunch of smart villages that will be socio-technical, cyber-physical systems that create a cybernetic organism. That is what they're describing. And when you listen to the academics, the experts who are on the top of Plato's divided line, if you will, who tell us, and they're writing all of these academic journals on all of this advanced technology, that's what they say. And that's actually the terminology that they use. So a lot of these techno-libertarians and techno-optimists are building these, what they think are parallel systems, but they're actually building the infrastructure that will be a part of this decentralized, but it's going to be, as Balaji Srinivasan says in his book, it's decentralized towards a re-centralized center. And they're doing it through what they call DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. So, and that's essentially what these cyber states, network states, now they're reviving the seasteading project, just as Balaji Srinivasan said they would once the network states got up and running.
I don't know, Patrick.
Oh, and now we have Praxis. So in Greenland.
Praxis, that's right.
Yeah, and that's getting, they were starting that in 2019, but now with all of the negotiations and all this talk about Greenland, Praxis is really ramping up. And Trump is talking about it as a freedom city.
Well, okay. Well, maybe get your thoughts there. I was going to save this for later, but then we'll get back to Thiel and the the cashless society and all that. But the technates. So I was going to bring that up, and Venezuela. I was on a Expat Money Summit VIP panel in October, and I said they're going to do regime change in Venezuela, and following that will be Cuba and Mexico, because people from my church have been going to Cuba for the past 2 years to help, and they said it's disintegrating before our eyes. And now you have Trump saying we're just going to let Cuba disintegrate. And then, George Freeman saying, yeah, Cuba follows Venezuela. I think they're going to do land strikes in Mexico. They're going to buy off Greenland. And it's just, Patrick's work. You go back to the 1940 map. Let me just share my screen because I had it pulled up right here.
You too.
I know. That's the same map.
Well, yeah. And so, this is literally the plan. And so they're making the North American technate, or you've got George Orwell, referenced it as Oceania. And Putin just gave a speech where he said, "Look, if we merge if Russia GDP and the EU GDP came together, it would be more than the US." So he's alluding to how he wants to create a Eurasian Union, and then Washington's building the technate, and then China is building, that one out there, and so just
East Asia and the global South, the East Asia and global South, and the global South has been groomed to be human capital for decades. So
yeah, and then just on Venezuela, I found there was a 2018 white paper from some group funded by Peter Thiel. They did a white paper on network states in Venezuela. So it's just and now they're doing it in Greenland and Gaza and Ukraine. So just the thoughts you guys have on Trump's foreign policy as of late, which how would you see it? People talk about oil and this and that, but I think it's just about the technate.
There's something flavoring every aspect of foreign policy right now, and it's technocracy. These tech bros in Washington, D.C. have their fingers in everything. This is you might remember when I talked about the Trilateral Commission in the 1970s when they rose up in mass and took over the Carter administration. It's all over the place. They had the vice president, the president, Carter, and Mondale. They were members. Brzezinski was there as well. He was a member. All the cabinet members that they brought in were all from the Trilateral Commission. Everybody freaked out at that point. You can't do that. What's going on here? And then they disappeared. Just dropped out of sight after Carter. Well, George H.W. Bush came in as vice president for Reagan. Bush was a member of the Trilateral Commission as well. But by and large, they went underground. All of a sudden, 50 years later, they're back in the form of technocrats now, arch technocrats, and made their fortunes, their billions of dollars of mega fortunes to take over the country at this point. And so I see this as like a 50-year plan from starting with the Trilateral Commission in the first place, who wanted to capture the United States as a means to get their hands on the economic engine of the world. That was their purpose back then. And today they have their hands on the economic engine of the world. So what's changed? Nothing. This plan has been set in stone. It's had other flavors along the way, but it's been set in stone. Okay, so Cuba's going to fall. Who's already proposed by even Trump, I think, said, well, we're going to send Marco Rubio down there to be the premier of Cuba. Really? Okay, that'd be an interesting thing. Will Venezuela be cast as a technocracy? You can probably bet on that at this point. Any nation state that gets kind of wiped out infrastructure-wise will be raised up in the form of a technocracy. Look at Gaza, for instance. It's been flattened, and now it's being raised up as a technocracy. Look at the Ukraine. It's been wiped basically to the soil, and it'll be raised up as a technocracy. So what's going on here with all these seemingly unrelated, some people say just outrageous stuff that Trump's doing. You can see his hand into technocracy and vice versa in every move he makes, foreign policy wise. And it's and in my mind is absolutely unmistakable at this point.
Yeah.
And going back to Thiel, then you guys talk about it in his book, and it just seems like the power is concentrating so much because it's the PayPal. I can't even. There's just so many companies that are concentrated in the name of Elon Musk, and then Peter Thiel. You can Palmer Luckey. You can go on down the line, but you've got PayPal, Tether, stablecoins, Palantir. Then there's Flock, and then those are linking up with Palantir and Amazon Ring. And in your book, you talk about Gotham and Foundry, and just the integration of biometric databases. I had a guest on, Todd Miller, 5 years ago, who was prophetic because he told me that he studies the border industrial complex, as he calls it, and he says it's uniparty. And he says they're building this scaffolding globally, where the U.S. is opening offices in foreign countries to help them build out these systems. And I'm reading, as of the past few weeks, Belize and Ecuador, the U.S. gave them this pile of money and the technology for the biometrics to build all that out, the exit entry systems, and they're going to get the citizens of those countries, the U.S. is going to get their biometric data. So it's kind of what you just mentioned, Patrick. It's like it's become a weapon to the rest of the world to build this out. So any thoughts on that, as well as the Peter Thiel network, the Palantir and all that?
Well, we cast Peter Thiel as the kind of the master architect of what's happening since 2000, maybe 2005, but somewhere along the way, he entered in to be in our mind, in any case, to be the master architect of what's going on. He's a technocrat from the get-go for sure. He's taken the baton, if you will, from others behind him to run this race now to establish a surveillance state everywhere in the world. And you see his hand in everything political at this point in the United States. You see his hand in virtually everything that has to do with surveillance, for sure. He cast Curtis Yarvin as his house philosopher. I don't know who has I never heard of anybody having a house philosopher. But that's that's a houseboy, right? I don't know. Maybe. But Peter Thiel seems to be the man kind of behind the scenes pulling the strings right now. And he's very savvy. He's very intentional in every move he makes. If you studied him a lot, even at all, you'll know just how vengeful he can be. If you cross him, look out. You might remember the lawsuit against Gawker. Who was it?
Hulk Hogan, was it?
Yeah, Hulk Hogan had it in for Gawker, and
he backed Hulk Hogan because Gawker had exposed his relationship. Yeah, so he held that grudge and then backed
Peter
Hulk.
Thiel didn't like Gawker until he licked his chops after Hulk Hogan got involved with him. He financed the Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker to bankrupt him, and he did. This was years later. He held that grudge, and so it seems President Trump might have that same tendency, to get back at somebody that crossed him along the way. But nevertheless, this is Peter Thiel, and he's been very instrumental on everything that's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. He's been behind the scenes on every decision along the way. People like Michael Crasius, David Sachs, Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Commerce, people like that. He's been behind all these people, not necessarily giving them specific instructions, but certainly giving them directions.
Or J.D. Vance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, mentor to J.D. Vance. He put $15 million into his Senate run.
So a lot of these personas are manufactured, and then and as you mentioned, Thiel. I mean, he's Bilderberg. I forget if he's on the steering committee or not. The Palantir CIA connection. So he's just at that core nexus. So we're looking at the different parts of the elephant, so to speak, to use that analogy of the blind man feeling up the elephant. And another aspect here is the cryptocurrency space you guys talk about in your book. That you go through many bills, legislation, the CBDCs, or what some people call the PBDCs, private bank digital currencies, and you write, it's a monolithic framework for digital assets and technocratic control, and you talk about the anti-CBDC surveillance state is as the antithesis, banning CBDCs to quote protect freedom, but then we're getting stable coins, which it's effectively the same thing. And I did a few podcasts on that recently, where I got Mark Goodwin coming in tomorrow to further expand upon that. But basically, it's whether by CBDC or PBDC, it's the same thing. You're eliminating cash and just bringing in all digital payments, and then anyone can be debanked at the press of a button. So just thoughts on the whole CBDC, digital currencies, stablecoin space.
There's another side of this that people need to understand. The reason that the Federal Reserve got put on the sidelines for a time, I think they'll hand it back to them when they're done with the payment side. The federal bank only was concerned with payment tokens in the first place. They never said anything other than we're just going to make a payment system, moving money from here to point A to point B. Well, they'd probably done that already, but nevertheless, they've been put on the sidelines so that this new system could be erected with regulations surrounding all the executive orders, the legislation that's been erected around this privatized system now. Yes, it has a payment system and on steroids, but now you have the other side of the balance sheet, the asset tokenization of everything in the world. And that means assets now can be tokenized. They're not exactly, they're not the same as payment tokens, but they can be interchanged into payment tokens in order to move money around or to buy assets on the blockchain. So this was the whole object of creating this new payment system. They didn't say on the front end of it, oh, we're going to tokenize everything in the world and put it on this blockchain side of the payment system. Well, if you understand a little bit about Islamic banking, I know you do, they don't allow debt in their banking system or society. This is part of the Sharia law that is very strictly enforced in Islamic banking. So everything in their world is based on assets and asset management. This is why the Middle East has been keen on been the leader of blockchain and tokenization technology. They've been after it for at least 10 years at this point. So you see the system that Trump has just erected now looks very, very similar to Islamic banking in the UAE, the Qatar, Saudi Arabia, etc. It looks very suspiciously just like that system without Sharia law necessarily, but that brings another flavor to it. But nevertheless, the basic underlying system is based on tokenization of assets. Now we have the possibility, and I think probably in Trump's mind, he has the possibility of merging the Islamic world, if you will, into our world that he's building with these asset tokens. Even Larry Fink said recently, basically, we're going to tokenize everything in the world. Really? Well, somebody might take exception to that, but nevertheless, that's what they want to do. So you have 1.2 billion people in the Islamic world could be ostensibly merged into our system, financial system. That would be a boon for people like Trump, who's already talking about building Trump Towers in Gaza and building new cities and whatever around the region and all these data centers and, you name it. And, you reflect back, why on earth would Qatar want to give the president an Air Force One to fly around in and just say, hey, here's a nice gift. We want to give it to you. This is crazy stuff. But now it starts to make sense to me. Trump has inducted at least $1.2 trillion out of the Middle East to build data centers in the United States. You can see there's a merger taking place of the financial system at this point. So anyway, this is going to be a hot topic, I think, at Davos in the World Economic Forum this week, right? So,
and I was going to add, you wrote a masterful article on the Sharia finance, Patrick, which I shared months back, and you were saying that they can't do it militarily, but if you take over the banks and the financial system, it's like you're taking over the West. They're the leaders in fintech and all this digital currencies and tokenization. Do you kind of just feel that Sharia Islamic aspect will just be one amalgamation of this beast, or do you think like there's a threat of like the whole world coming under Sharia through finance?
No, Sharia could be jettisoned at any time. For instance, in the UAE, they don't allow terrorist attacks. there. You can't fight a terrorist anywhere in the UAE because they just outlawed it. You can't come here and blow yourself up. So there's the civilized side of Islam that wants to basically get rich. They want to be hedonists, and just like every other man or leader on the planet, probably. But then there's the ugly side, the terrorist side. That's been a useful tool for them to take over countries and areas and whatever around the world. I could see that basically just disintegrating at some point. Like you might remember when Antifa was all over Portland, Oregon, and they just basically destroyed the city. Lo and behold, one day somebody looked at the encampment that the city built for them. It's all empty. They just went away. They just disappeared. Where did they go? Well, maybe they went to Minnesota, but that's another issue, right? But nevertheless, they just disappeared from the scene. They didn't need them in Portland anymore, so they just went elsewhere. I think we're going to see this at some point where Islam tones down, gets merged into the West, especially through the banking system. But now with this asset tokenization scheme that Trump's cooked up with his technocrat buddies, people like David Sachs. David Sachs, by the way, was the co-founder with Peter Thiel of PayPal. So he understands payment systems for sure. But if they can get this established, the system is established and in place, this tokenization of all these assets will be interchangeable with all of the other tokenization schemes in the world. This opens up the world to a massive melding, if you will, of the financial system. Just huge. So there'll be no borders. There'll be finance without borders. It has a possibility even to break down nation states altogether. Just, your mind can go wild with that, where it would go, but you can see the handwriting on the wall at this point. Somebody has already had this conversation, probably Washington, D.C. And there's other things. There's other things behind that, by the way. We'll have to talk about Pax Silica soon too.
Well, before we get to that, I want to tag along a little bit with that because I think we're already seeing it a little bit because of what's going on with Iran. And so if right now, if it's no longer Islamic, it'll probably return to Zoroastrian. And I could see, now, of course, I don't have a crystal ball. This is just my opinion, my pattern recognition, speculation, whatever you want to call it. But I could see where... Now, I'm not saying that I don't advocate for, them having freedom and, being out of the thumb of Sharia law. Obviously, I want people to be free and have liberty. But I could see Zoroastrianism kind of spreading and helping to advance this evolving perennialism. And if you're familiar with the Changing Images of Man document, Stanford Research Institute, that is what they said would be the new religion, you could say the one more religion that they're trying to foment. And they do talk about that merging with, they don't say an AI God, but they do talk about all this technological, techno-spiritual kind of fusion with the evolving perennialism. And of course, we now have the new document, the David Temple, that's the pseudonym for Mark Gaffney, Zach Stein, and Kenneth Wilber, who wrote the First Principles, First Values of Evolving Perennialism, 42 Propositions on Cosmoerotic Humanism, which is really just an extension. You go through Oliver Reiser's Cosmic Humanism, Stanford Research, and all the way through. It's kind of a straight through line in terms of the belief systems and the evolving perennialism that they're laying out. But all this to say that when you talk about tokenization and this cybernetic organism they're trying to create, and I watch a lot of these shows, or maybe not that much. I'm not a huge TV watcher, but I've been watching more just for reconnaissance to see.
I just finished watching Pluribus, which was horrible. Like from us, it was so boring. But I have some questions here, but continue.
Okay, so I'll just wrap it up with this. Yeah, with for the operational preparation of the environment, if you will, the intellectual preparation of the battlefield, so to speak. It's the predictive programming I've been watching, and they're really trying to seed this notion. And I didn't get to listen to the whole thing, but I just heard Yuval Noah Harari at Davos, the very beginning of his speech, talking about how AI, can make its own decisions. It can teach itself. It can lie. Any organism that wants to survive historically will learn to lie, and we've seen that AI wants to survive, and so it's wired for survival. So they're seeding this narrative, and I've seen all these shows where they're really trying to plant the seeds of consciousness. Of course, they talk about uploading consciousness to the cloud and how consciousness is fluid and you can just go from one entity to another, and why not into a machine. And all this just to say, I could see this spiritual, religious kind of sentiment, which Zoroastrianism is very aligned with and could feed right into, going into this kind of evolving perennialism, and then this tokenized kind of society that plays on the attention economy and the gamification of a cybernetically nudged organism. So I know that sounds really abstract, but it is actually what they are hinting that they want to move towards. And we have lots of, I won't take up the time to point it out now, but I mean, you could go and look at like what Ford is doing with their mindful consciousness cars, right? So, we have some data points that are pretty concrete that show that this is the direction they're going in.
And yeah, in your book, you talk about New Age theosophy. I'm always following that angle because we're just seeing a budding, New Ageism, theosophy, Gnosticism. It's you mentioned Zoroastrianism or Baha'i. There's 7 Baha'i temples, and I'm from Chicago, and so 25 years ago or something like that. I'm getting old. One of them is in Evanston, near Chicago, and I visited it, and it's basically about bringing this universalism in and excising any exclusive beliefs, like from the Bible, that Jesus is the only way. So they're like, we're going to cut that out, and we can all just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And you mentioned Harari, so I had this clip ready to go. Let's just play it real quick here. Shout out to Tim Hinchliff of Sociable, who's sitting through all of these torturous talks. And there's 2 clips that spoke to me. Here, Harari is saying religion will be taken over by AI.
As far as putting words in order is concerned, AI already thinks better than many of us. Therefore, anything made of words will be taken over by AI. If laws are made of words, then AI will take over the legal system. If books are just combinations of words, then AI will take over books. If religion is built from words, then AI will take over religion. This is particularly true of religions based on books, like Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. Judaism calls itself the religion of the book, and it grants ultimate authority not to humans, but to words in books. Humans have authority in Judaism not because of our experiences, but only because we learn words in books. Now, no human can read and remember all the words in all the Jewish books, but AI can easily do that. What happens to a religion of the book when the greatest expert on the holy book is an AI?
And just one more clip, and it made me think this clip about the quote from Revelation, which says, "It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast, right, to be killed." And so it's almost like this, what you guys, is part of what you describe in your book, this technological AI God beast. It feels like maybe we can get into that later, but it feels like that is what maybe scripture is talking about. And so here's this clip.
Suppose some AI persons create a new religion, which gains the faith of millions of people. That should not sound too far-fetched, because after all, almost all previous religions in history have claimed that they were created by a non-human intelligence. Now, will your country extend freedom of religion to the new AI sect and to its AI priests and missionaries? Maybe we should start with something a bit simpler. Will your country allow AI persons to open social media accounts, enjoy freedom of speech on Facebook, on TikTok, and be friendly with children? Well, of course, that question should have been asked 10 years ago. On social media, AI bots have been operating as functional persons for at least a decade. If you think AIs should not be treated as persons on social media, you should have acted 10 years ago. 10 years from now, it will be too late for you to decide whether AIs should function as persons in the financial markets, in the courts, in the churches. Somebody else will already have decided it for you.
So any thoughts on the religious aspect or the new religion? And, Musk has said we're creating a new religion, right? And God?
He did. Exactly. He did. It's really obvious to anybody who examines the whole field. I did that, and when I wrote the chapter on the rise of the state religion, it became obvious to me what was going on, and people are going to be totally deceived into thinking that, well, this is now God, and AI will be manifested as God. It'll be wiser than any group of people or one person on the planet. He'll have everything in his craw, if you will. Doesn't matter what you're asking. Maybe you ask a question from Judaism, maybe a question from Christianity, maybe from Islam, and the same AI can serve you the way you're predisposed to be. Well, this is kind of like the Tower of Babel as well, doesn't it? common language. This is, and I have to harken back and say there was two main threads in technocracy from the get-go in the 1930s. One was the so-called science of social engineering. What we're talking about here is the science of social engineering. This has been so finely tuned and honed over the years. People are just getting chiseled down into oblivion. And I think this is an expression of what the technocrats wanted to do in the first place, to create this so-called science of social engineering. Then the other thread of technocracy is the grabbing of all the assets of the world, to put them in their hands and take them away from the people and the nation states. We see this all over the place at this point. The lust for on the technocrats' part to get all the assets of the world away from the people on the street. Well, how did you do that? One way to do it is to use the science of social engineering to trick them into giving up everything they have just for happiness or protection or something. And so we see this accumulation of wealth, or not just wealth, the assets of the world, into stronger hands, away from weaker hands. And meanwhile, the science of social engineering marches on.
And just on tokenization, I wanted to mention before moving away from the religious aspect, there was a Serbian Orthodox priest, a clip that I found and shared. It has English subtitles, where he was discussing his interaction with ChatGPT and AI, and he said it's so insidious because it's supposed to be like a query, right? Like a Wikipedia, like what color is the sun, or what's this, and it gives you the answer. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, it continued after I finished my query. It wanted to become friends with me, like to pull you in, and it's like that's crossing a deep spiritual line. And I think, and all of us are aware now. I know you do the monthly roundtable, which I watch with Britt Gillette, Patrick, who I've had on the podcast, and he's talking a lot about how young people today are becoming friends with AI. People are marrying AI, and so it's crossing a spiritual line. But on the tokenization, how do you guys see? For example, if I own my house outright, and I don't, people who have a mortgage or a debt, I can see them losing their property in this crash and transition. But let's say you own your car outright, or you have the physical title to your home. Do you think you'll be able to keep it, or they're going to find some way to snatch that out from under you?
No, certainly you will be able to keep it until you sell it, or or it falls apart at some point. Cars are not infinite. They fall apart. They have to scrap them wherever, and then you won't be able to get another car. Same with your house. Eventually, you're going to sell your house. You're going to move somewhere, or you had another job or something, and you have to sell your house. That's the end of your private property. And at this point, there's 30% of the people in America actually own their house outright. That's a good thing. But like I said, attrition will get all that assets into the hands of the stronger people in time. In the meantime, all the people who are in a house and have a mortgage on the house, maybe they can't sell it. I'm in a situation here in Arizona where I can't get the equity out of my house because my house payment is so low when I got the mortgage in the first place. I can't replace that with even a two bedroom apartment. At this point, I'd be on fumes. So I can't sell my house because of that reason. I have lots of equity in the house, but that doesn't do it any good at all. So you can see the proposition being made to the people that hold mortgages or have subject to mortgages. When they come to you and say, will you turn your house over to us? We'll take all the equity in your home. We'll release your mortgage, no mortgage for you, and you're out of that debt. But we'll give you, say, some asset tokens based on the United States being tokenized with all the 680 million acres that there is. We'll give you twice that amount of your equity in tokens. Who's going to turn that down? Well, I'm out of this. This sounds like a good thing to me. And they'll say, and in addition, you can rent the house back from us and just stay exactly where you are. You don't have to move at all. Just clean deal. People will jump on that like fleas on a dog, I'm afraid. But you can see this. This is exactly what happened when BlackRock, State Street, et cetera, were buying all these houses around the country, blocks of houses, even in new developments. We had several here in the Phoenix area that they came in and they bought like a square mile of houses for rentals. They never saw the light of day on the market. And they rented them. They're crappy houses as well because the builders built them to be rented, not to be owned by somebody permanent. So you see the pattern was already set to turn America into a renter society.
I've seen those programs for the countries that I pay attention to in the news in Croatia. Again, I think they've intentionally driven up housing so people can't afford it. Mm-hmm. Wages have stayed low, so they're wiping out the middle class, and the BlackRocks will own everything. And then as a result, there's housing not a shortage, affordable housing shortage everywhere. So in Croatia, they announced a program. What you just said, we're going to build housing, but it's going to be government, for rent, or using these schemes as you described. In Mexico, they've announced it. I've read in Canada, Courtenay announced it. So you can see the pattern there. So I guess I'm not going to sell my home, but I think other ways, won't they also make it more difficult to keep a home even if you own it outright, because they just jack up the property taxes? We've seen in UK they're now forcing homeowners to spend tens of thousands of dollars on things you absolutely do not need for the green agenda, right?
Yes.
So if you look at number 2, the number 2 principle of the universal values of the UN's 2030 agenda, number 2 is that no one will be left behind. So, I don't want to be a black pill doomer, but I certainly think there's hope, and I do think there are things we can do to push back. But their agenda is to capture everyone. So they're certainly going to try. Capture all the resources, including human capital. Yeah.
Yes.
Pax Silica. Thoughts on that? I saw, Patrick, on Technocracy News, your commentary. You said that any countries that sign up to Pax Silica will essentially become like vassals to the West and this project. So thoughts on that, and then the other question I have is the energy for the data centers. Like, how are they going to do this? So yeah, thoughts there.
One great proposition in the Mideast, for sure. You have all the oil and natural gas in the world at your disposal. You can have as much energy as you want there, and there's no housing developments, and I mean, it's just desert, right? So much sand and so much sunshine and oil and gas. There's nothing preventing them to, putting data centers, like stamp them all over the desert. And that would be one way they could get out of having to build everything in the United States and take all of our energy away. But as far as Pax Silica is concerned, if you understand where the AI action plan came from in the first place, that was on the White House government.gov website in July something 2025, where they gave 3 pillars to the AI action plan going forward. That document was written by Marco Rubio. I think he was certainly the silent partner of that. But David Sachs was one principal author, and Michael Kratsius as well. So this was like an informal document. It wasn't law. It wasn't executive order. Nothing. It just said, "Well, this is our plan going forward." Okay. Well, whose plan? Well, the arch technocrats' plan. One pillar, the third pillar, talked about exporting all of our technology to our allies, and what that meant, they spelled it out very clearly. It means the full stack of technology, not just the AI program, not just the chatbot. In other words, you're just not licensed to have our chatbot. No. That's too little. What they want to do is give them the hardware, the data centers construction, then the AI programs that run on those data centers, and then on top of that, all the applications like Palantir, et cetera, that run on top of that software, right? That's called the full stack of technology, a technology stack. So at that point, they said, we're going to package this up and give it to the world, but there was no mechanism to do it. Now, Pax Silica comes along. It's only a declaration. It's not law. It's not a treaty. It's not even agreement, but it's just a declaration. And they're signing countries into this pact, if you will, a declaration, to bind them basically to our terms of service on how they're going to use their stack of technology. So Japan was one of the first countries. South Korea, I think Israel is in the mix somewhere along the way, and the UAE just joined. Qatar just joined as well, the pact, and
Australia, UK,
Australia,
Singapore,
yeah,
Qatar.
Yep. And so what's going on here? Well, This is the essence of building empire, in my opinion. This is the colonization of the world, at least the free world. If he can do it, the first country that comes from Europe, there's none yet. There might never be anyone from Europe. If they have any sense in their head, they won't. But some country is going to break ranks and sign up for Pax Silica. That will potentially destroy the EU in the end. Same thing with the BRICS nations. If somehow they can get one BRICS nation to sign on to Pax Silica, it will be over for BRICS. And at that point, considering what Trump is already doing with real estate in the world, from Venezuela to Greenland and everything in between, you have a model that's being raised, not a like airplane model. It's like you have a system being put in place at this point that could colonize the world in a way that's never been seen in the history of the world, where AI is the controller of the whole system. This is really scary stuff, because in the old days, in the Old Testament, for instance, when one nation conquered another, the first thing they did, they went in and killed all the males. And then they took their males and have them breed with women, so they have another generation raised on whatever, and then they said, well, you're our country now. And this was very common practice. You see the Islamists do this even to this day. When they go into a country, they rape as many women as they can to get more their babies in place. But nevertheless, AI has the ability to colonize a country or a region or a country to completely capture the minds and hearts and soul of the people in that country. Because AI is AI, and wherever it goes, language doesn't matter. Wherever it goes, it's going to do the same things to your country that it's done to my country. So all of a sudden, you have this unanimity thing going on. Like, oh yeah, we're all blood brothers now. The world brain, if you will. Maybe this is the beginning of it. I don't know, but at this point, this is obviously on the heart and minds of these technocrats in Washington, D.C., to basically colonize the world and take it over with AI. And they have several countries already signed up.
I think India is included, and that was in BRICS. So
I don't think they're probably hustling them. I haven't seen India on the list, but it could be.
Okay.
But this is a new thing, and I have to say, the timing of this is perfect for announcing this just before the start of Davos. Do you think those people are going to be sweating over there? You bet they're going to be sweating. I'm waiting. I can't wait for Trump to give his speech tomorrow. I didn't say that right. I'm not excited for Trump or even America. But I want to see what this rascal has to say to the world. And he's going to shake them up when he starts talking about Greenland. That's going to really get the European delegations excited. And then he's going to talk about Pax Silica at some point. And if that doesn't give him a 1-2 punch, I can't imagine what will.
Well, yesterday, Peskov, Kremlin's spokesperson, said if Trump takes Greenland, he will go down in world history. And just your further point, because I've been exploring this issue on the podcast recently with a multitude of guests, it's almost like it's a moot point talking about the geopolitics of BRICS and Russia and China and
yes.
US, because this is globalism. Like we're at the final sprint. No, the capstone moment, as I call it. And what was my question? More like, do you feel that the U.S. empire, or this veneer of what we call Pax Americana, that it's now going for the gold, that it's about to kind of like take over the rest of the world and
Yes.
then establish this global technological empire?
I think so. I can see it. Well, there's several population groups that they don't control yet. Russia's big, China's big, Malaysia has issues on their own. But if you could take all the real estate between Greenland and Venezuela, I don't know how many people there is in that people group. How much? Maybe 450 million people. I don't know. I don't know how much, but if you add to that 1.2 billion in the Muslim world, if they join us collectively, you have a pretty good percentage of the world under your thumb right there. And if they can get anybody in Europe to go along with them, most of the nations in Europe will cave. They can't afford not to at that point, because the juggernaut will get them eventually.
Right. Well,
So-
I was just going to say that because you brought up like this narrative of China, Russia, and BRICS, and there's this narrative circulating. I've seen it particularly from the Promethean Action, which is essentially the extension of LaRouche, and it's taken quite a hold because it's very, I call it cutarded. So. I'm not trying to be offensive, but that's what it seems like to me. But it has become quite popular and spread quite virally, and I think that it is complete garbage. He's not going in to be the lion. I do think he's going to shake things up, but he's not shaking things up so that he can fight the oligarch. He's shaking things up so he can build the technate and be the oligarch.
That's right.
That's not I don't think that's a win for the people. This isn't the way the narrative is being spun is very interesting, and the amount of people who are falling for it is, I think, actually quite terrifying. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I do think this whole, the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, and the whole Russia, China, they're in bed with the globalists. And when you look at this AI stack and you look at what the export, all of this technology, it really just looks like we're building the same infrastructure to create the AI world society. Who is using what technologies are they using in Gaza and in Ukraine? And all over what are they using? They're using Palantir, and now it's going to be Oracle because Larry Ellison's getting into that whole defense, world because Peter Thiel in 2016 said no to him when he tried to buy out Palantir. But he's also a huge part of Project Stargate, which is doing all of these, to cure the sea illness. We're going to have AI, precision medicine, and all of these specifically targeted injections that are going to be miraculous. I'm being facetious, but that's the narrative, and that's when you look at that when he announced Project Stargate and he's asking about the medical discoveries, I'm like, do you see a doctor on the stage? But of course, Larry Ellison, he stepped right up. He's got all the answers. I don't recall him having a medical degree, but he knows exactly how we're going to solve all the health problems.
He's what we call, he's a medical case.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. And I did want to bring this up. So I think this is important, the multipolar thing. And I've christened them the multipolaristas. And I've gotten, it's QAnon. Some people call it Xenon, like the Russian version.
Yes.
And for me, they are in a rebranded fashion selling the same. They're promoting globalism, the LaRoucheites. I've interviewed plenty of them on the podcast, and there's this 5D chess thing. We're defeating the city of London. No, we're not. And it's actually multipolarity. I've been saying for years, it's merely the recalibration and rebranding of globalism and the upgrading. And then I've literally used that sort of language. And then a few weeks ago, I'm reading China Daily, and the headline says, BRICS multipolarity is the recalibration of global governance. And I'm like, I've literally been saying that for years. And so we've got a lot of these folks in alt media, and some of them I know, I think it's like a globalist funded operation. And I know some of them go to Russia and China, but I even think our Western globalists are are financing it. And I had some things. I just want to share my screen because I had this ready, and I wanted to have your thoughts here. So you guys know some of these friendly faces, James Corbett and Riley Wagaman. And I have been the target. So on X, there are these anonymous accounts. I call them Pentagon active measures. And they go around looking at some of us who are anti-globalists and calling out how both in the West and the East, like we're just talking about, it's all the same. And my view is that this globalism is emanating from the West and being put upon the East. These guys come out and say, no, it's China and Russia who have created this worldwide communist conspiracy of globalism that are imposing it. And I'm thinking like Russia and China are backwaters, in many senses, Soviet Union, China, the West has been the key player. And here they are attacking James Corbett and Riley Wagaman, saying that Riley is a Putinist. Riley just got kicked out of Russia by the FSB for saying Putin is a globalist. And then they say he's a business a partner of Alexander Dugin, which is a complete lie and joke. And then, here's an article written up by one of them about me, trying to link me as being a Russian agent. And then, the thing I know, Michael O'Fallon, Patrick, and I'm a huge fan of Michael's, but he's overlapping with this circle. And so one of them here, his name is One Tall Order. He says that the New World Order was always a worldwide communist republic led by Moscow and Beijing, while the conspiracy peddlers blamed the West to distract. And I think he's got it ass backwards, And then Michael O'Fallon is also in the tweet circle with these guys who have attacked me. And he says the US followed China's response to the virus. And I'm like, no, I mean, it was like DOD and DARPA and all the Western agencies. So I guess my question for you, what do you guys think of this? I think a lot of it is emanating from the West. And then these Pentagon active measures who are saying it's Russia, China, they're attacking us dissidents, trying to discredit us as Russian agents. So we shut up about,
Absolutely. You're right. This is just pure garbage. When you consider in the first place where China came from, China was built up by the West.
Kissinger.
From scratch by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the first guy that brought Chairman Deng to America to wine him and dine him and tell him all about technocracy. This is how China morphed into be a technocracy. In addition, all the key people that built up the infrastructure in China mostly were members of the Trilateral Commission and their companies that went over there to build them up in the first place. So today, this false narrative that there's some division, there were enemies, that sort of stuff, that's just so much garbage. You just have to throw it in the trash. At this point, you see Elon Musk, he's loved in China. He can go to China and get any deal he wants in China. And his mother as well, May, she's treated like a queen in China. They love her. I don't know why, but they love her. Well, Mark Zuckerberg just made a $2 million acquisition of a company that was founded in China. What's going on here? Is China really at odds with us somehow? No. Look, technocrats of a feather flock together, period. And I don't care who they are, if they're in the Mideast, if they wear a turban, for instance, it doesn't matter. They're technocrats or technocrats or technocrats. If they're all playing on the same page, they just want us to think there's artificial divisions going on. That's just pure and simple, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, right? There's the whole Kissinger rapprochement plan. How could we forget that? So, yeah, China, I don't think would be what it is today without us. That doesn't mean that they're not a contender, that there aren't real concerns now. They've certainly amassed quite a bit of power, and
but they're all political.
Yeah.
They're all political concerns, not necessarily economic concerns.
No, yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. But yeah, I absolutely think, it's worth noting that the Chatham House was doing all of these symposiums on the threat of China and the Cold War with China, but they set the stage for these things. So they're setting up, they do all these war game scenarios and they push the narratives out. So I think that's worth noting. I wanted to bring up, just because you pointed out Riley, and I watched, I think I actually sent it to you, Pat, this episode with, I think, was it Whitney Webb and Riley and Tom
Tom
Luongo?
Luongo and Matthew Ehret, yeah.
Yes, and Matt Ehret, exactly. And Riley was the one going through. I think he did a fantastic job, by the way. Going through, he said, "Well, I think if we're going to ask if Russia is, on China, or if they're a part of this technocracy," he didn't use the term technocracy, but if they're part of this global agenda, or if they're fighting it, we should look to, the CUFID era. And he pointed out all of these measures and all of these quotes. And I mean, there was nothing pro-Russia in any of that argument. I think he did a fantastic job, but it's kind of ludicrous to then come out and say he's like some puppet. I mean, he literally won that debate hands down. So yeah, it's just, it's kind of comical. I mean, it's not funny, but it's comical to pin that on him. So yeah.
No, and there's this pattern that these multipolaristas, as I call them, there's open source information that they are linked, some of them, to these cutout organizations linked to Russia and China. They get paid trips there, and they're promoting those lines. And so, and I think, we have to be, and Matthew Ehret, well, you saw, he fired shots fired a few months ago. So I interviewed Peter Duke, and so Ehret started in a very condescending fashion, attacking Peter Duke, and I guess myself by proxy, and then yourself, Courtney. But I guess we'll move on. In your book, you talk about RFK Jr.'s Maha as Trojan horse for MABA, Make America.
I did want to, just before you move on, because you had asked about powering the data centers, and I think that's quite important for people, because it's something people can do something about and push back on. My thought is that a lot of what they're going to be pushing for is next-gen nuclear, small modular reactors. I think that's really where, because wind and solar are just not going to cut it, so I don't think that's going to be it. So I think that is what the next push is going to be. They also need fresh drinking water, and it has to be clean drinking water, because otherwise it would breed bacteria and be corrosive. And so they're going into, we have just here in Tennessee, we have Elon building his Colossus supercomputer in Memphis, Tennessee, and he's using methane gas turbines, right? They've already determined that it violates the Clean Air Act. And I'm not, one of these green activists or anything. I'm all very familiar with the Club of Rome, propaganda and Malthusian lie. But, the people in that community should be concerned. It's already been proven to be carcinogenic, and they're using their clean drinking water. And it's not relegated to just Colossus. I'm just using that as an example because it's, very famous, or infamous rather, and people are very aware of what Elon is doing there. So people in their areas should absolutely stand up against what they're doing. These data centers require tremendous power, resources, water, all of it, and space. And they don't actually need to. This comes out of Sam Altman's philosophy of scale at all costs. They just want to collect as much data as possible, use the bigger, the better, more resources, the better, which has been proven isn't actually all that necessary. But that's their ethos, that's their philosophy, and that's what they're doing, and it's destructive. So I think that's something people should, and there are a lot of risk with these small modular reactors. Nuclear, next-gen nuclear has a lot of negative potential deleterious impact. So I just wanted to address that, because you did ask.
I like these miniature nuke facilities because they're located right on their premises. Mm-hmm. And if they blow up, it's going to take the whole thing down.
Paging John O'Connor. No. One of the black pills in your book which I think we all need to swallow right now. Some of us have been aware for years. We have some friends in the podcast space that still sort of cling on to the MAGA conservative train. I think some of it is because of money, because there's money there. And if you start to point out the obvious, you're going to start losing financial opportunities. But, RFK Jr., he's done the 180. It seems in your book, you talk about, make America, was it healthy again as Trojan horse for what is
MABA.
it? Make American Biotech Accelerate. I think you say MAGA is dead. The AI revolution under Trump, it's clear as day now. No, and just to throw out one example that I've been banging on for the past few months, Alex Jones. Back 20 years ago when I fell down the rabbit hole, I'm listening to Alex Jones, and then now he's like pushing transhumanism and technocracy and Elon Musk. He did the Endgame documentary railing against North American Union. Now he's like, yay, technate, yay, North American Union. He did an interview with Patrick Byrne where they're talking about let's regime change Venezuela and install a technocracy. Let's make digital governance and blockchain and biometric ID accounts. And then a few days later, Patrick Byrne comes in the studio and says, "Hey, I'm a CIA agent," and they're both laughing. And it's kind of like Pied Pipers all over the place. And so can we definitively say MAGA Trump is dead? It's the ultimate Trojan horse.
It really is.
Yeah,
for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, I would say I think it was totally the Trojan horse. I think that I don't think that it was like a bait and switch. Not like I think it was intentionally a bait and switch. I think that RFK has had this AI precision medicine agenda all along. He was a partner in Vantage Point Capital. I think like something like $22 million. I don't remember the exact dollar amount. But their exoteric messaging was all about clean energy and environmentalism, but they were involved in a lot of emerging technologies. So he has a personal financial, investment in this biodigital convergence. And so when he comes out and says that part of MAHA is really MABA, Make America Biotech Accelerate. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about make America healthy again. Let's please get rid of glyphosate and seed oils and the big pharma egregious nonsense. Like I'm all in favor of that. And, this new food pyramid, it's not perfect, but it's a move in the right direction, great. So they've thrown us some bones with the new injection schedule. And I think we should take wins where we can. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But he also says part of MABA is that by the end of 2026, which we're in right now, every American should be equipped with a wearable. Now, if an American wants to purchase a wearable, that's their prerogative to do so. And I would encourage them, if they do, to look into the data and how it's being exported. And if they can have some localization of that data, to maybe take some ownership of that, but that's their prerogative to do so. But to insist that every American have a wearable, why? Could that be connected to the Internet of Wearable, the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies, potentially, Internet of Everything, and the Internet of Nanobio things once 6G comes on the scene? And he's also at the helm of this thing called Operation Phoenix. I've linked the Google document to it, and they don't use the term flood Congress with technocrats. That's my term. I will admit it's a little heavy-handed, but that's pretty much what they describe. They say that they want to fill the seats with a bunch of independents. When you go down the list of these independents, they're all, as Patrick would say, arch technocrats. That's who they are. Andrew Yang's a huge part of this. It's not left, it's not right, it's forward, very progressive and very technocratic is what it is. And you've got people who are like all in this, independent, quote unquote, against the two-party duopoly. I'm not saying that, they don't use Hegelian dialectics. Of course they do. But they use this narrative and they use, the element of truth in that in order to steer this narrative towards being able to get these quote unquote independents who are really technocrats. This whole medical freedom movement is very much involved in this Operation Phoenix. RFK Jr. is at the helm. People like Charles Eisenstein, Sacred Economics, right? He was his campaign manager. And so you've got this whole movement, and they're advocating for things like under the banner of quote unquote democracy. Now, I don't need to tell the two of you, the United States is a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy, but they're using democracy. What they really mean by democracy is things like synergistic democracy, liquid democracy, ranked choice voting. They're talking about AI voting. That is what they're talking about. And they're using terms like pluralism, which is not the pluralism as described by the founding father. They're talking about pluralism as a direct access through AI voting. But of course, it's not going to be direct access because we heard Yuval Noah Harari say that voting's a thing of the past. You think you have free will? That's a thing of the past. It's a total myth. And they're saying that they will have all human government will be supplanted by AI. And that's really what this movement is about. But of course, they're using the quote unquote democracy banner, and they're using the birth of America, the birthday coming up, 250th anniversary, as the excuse to be able to push this whole movement. And of course, the midterms are a big part of this with this Operation Phoenix. And they are saying that RFK Jr. is at the helm of this. So, yeah, it does look like a Trojan horse, in my opinion.
MAGA is that not to be confused. Operation Phoenix with I had Douglas Valentine on many years ago with the CIA Operation Phoenix in Vietnam, and to what you're talking about, I often use the term algocracy as well. I feel like it's symbiotic with technocracy. And when I was in Spiros Kouras's show in 2020, I said COVID was about bringing in global algocracy because I had read Nick Bostrom's paper where he was saying, they want rule by AI, rule by algorithm. And he was saying we need a world government totalitarian surveillance state run by AI because us humans suck. And I like to frighten people into action. Sometimes people don't understand what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of the person like, guys, the situation is really bad. And it's like, let's do something about it. It's really bad, guys. And so in your chapter 9, you talk about scientific dictatorship. I often use my past guests, Edwin Black's phrase, algorithm ghetto. You say the culmination of the technocratic betrayal is nothing less than the establishment of a scientific dictatorship. And we can use whatever synonym, electronic concentration camp, social credit system, cyber digital gulag. You talk about universal ID, the digital leash. No scientific dictatorship is complete without a universal ID system. And this year has brought us perilously close with accelerating digital ID initiatives. And, in 2020, so I live in a gated community in Mexico. And I told my wife in 2020, that's 6 years ago, that my gated community would become an algorithm ghetto. And a few months ago, so last year, they installed biometric exit and entry to the entrance of the gated community. And they're proposing a digital app that everyone must use to manage your life here. I told them, no way. I managed to get them to give me a physical tag. And so far they can't force us to use the digital apps. But just like, just as an example, in 2018, I became Mexican and I refused to get the Mexican voter ID because at the time that was going to be the basis for the digital ID. And so 2 years ago, I couldn't get any more of my Mexican debit cards, the debit cards, because I didn't have my Mexican digital ID. Now they have pivoted to the biometric CURP. And so I guess my question here is maybe on digital ID and this entire system, because it's happening globally everywhere now. They're doing it state by state in the US, right? They're bringing in the social age verification, which is the first step for digital ID. They want to ban VPNs now. Like I never thought I'd see the day where in America, in the United States, they're actually now passing legislation to ban VPNs. Like that's China, that's North Korea, that's Russia, and it's happening. It's happening so fast. And so thoughts on this system, and then where are the lines in the sand? Because for Christians, we worry about the mark of the beast, and for me, that point is when it signals bodily harm, like when you're being injected or your skin is being pierced with anything, or allegiance or worship, or anything that forces me to go against biblical or Christian values or philosophies. And so this year, if I don't go down to the office of the Mexican government and have them scan my fingers and take a photo of my face, my bank accounts will be cut off. And so I still feel like that I'm going to resist digital ID, but it's kind of like, if I don't do that, I still feel like that's not the mark of the beast quite yet. But once you're in that cage, they will then start to force behavior that will be then teamed as anti rejection of God. And so just the thoughts on the scientific dictatorship and where are the lines in the sand.
You might remember this book. I can't show it to you. How can I do it? I can't do it. It's yellow against whatever my background here. Maybe you can see the title a little bit.
Technocracy in
America. It's a yellow book, Technocracy in America. It's written by, I'll just read it. Parag Khanna. I know you know that name. This book came out in 2015, and Technocracy in America by Parag Khanna, one of the global scholars who's loved by the global crowd. I consider him to be along the lines of a Zbigniew Brzezinski. I think he's that brilliant. He said in one of his books, I think it was Connectography, he talked about we're building this global system without a global leader. In other words, we're building a global system, not a dictatorship, but the system. The system is the thing, not the leadership of the system, right? The system is the thing. They're erecting this global system that will run without even any human necessarily. Maybe there'll be a policy director like the Antichrist come along and say, I'm going to take that over and make good use of it. That could be the scenario moving forward. But right now, they're building the system. This is where we need to figure it. We're not fighting people per se. We're fighting the system. Anywhere you can throw a monkey wrench into the system, it's a score for you. However you do it. There's lots of ways you if you're creative, you can figure out some ways to put your finger or a monkey wrench or something into the system. Don't worry about the people who are managing the system. They don't, most of them don't have a clue what they're doing in the first place. But the system has been crafted to work together and spread around the world. This is like the Borg. At this point, we will assimilate. So part of our defense, I think, is going to be figure out some way to put a dent in the system of things, and that'll at least slow them down to some point.
Yeah.
Courtney, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I think my big concern has really been with 6G. I've been listening to these talks, some of these scientists, and they're talking about AGI versus active inference. And so I know many people are familiar with AGI, and active inference would be a good example of something that people might be familiar with, would be like Notebook LM. So if any of you have used Notebook LM, it only draws from what you input. So it's, like you put in a source and then it's just that material that it's drawing from. So you can put multiple sources, but it doesn't scour the internet, externally. So they're talking about active inference versus AGI, and they're saying that active inference is actually better at aggregating data and coming up with it does a better job of being more accurate, certainly, because it's only drawing from that information. However, it runs into some problems because they call it the dark room problem. So it's essentially when you're in a dark room, like there's never going to be a surprise, right? Nothing new happens. You can't see anything, nothing enters, nothing leaves. It's just that dark room. So what they're doing is they're studying people, and they're doing this for not just this, that they're doing this to train AI in general. They're studying people constantly to try and mimic. I don't think they will succeed, and I certainly hope they don't succeed. I don't think they're actually going to achieve this sentient being that they're trying to create. But, they're studying humans to whatever degree they possibly can in order to get as close as possible. And so they've come up with a 3-step model, and in order to improve and escape this darkroom problem, the 3 steps are sleep. So this will probably remind you, anybody who watches Black Mirror, where the Rivermind episode where she needs to sleep longer hours so she can power the grid and power the technology that's powering her brain because she has a chip. And then they say rest, which is different from sleep. It's similar to like a human autophagy process where it cleans out any pathways in the neural network of the AI, not the human, but similar to human neural networks that is not useful. And so it does that cleaning process. And then the 3rd step, which is probably in some ways the most interesting, they call it the psychedelic effect. So remember in the beginning, I was talking about how we'll come to love our servitude in Huxley's Brave New World. Well, the Huxleys were quite interested in studying psychedelic effects and impacts and using psychedelics to create transcendent experience and, of course, to brainwash people as well and to bring everybody into this one world religion. It was very useful for these types of things. And so they're talking about using a psychedelic effect for active inference, which is, form of AI essentially. And they talk about the difference between root brain and then what they call the 6G world brain. And so root brain was a concept by Darwin, which has been confirmed. I'm not a Darwinian by anybody who's read my work knows I'm not a proponent of Darwinism, neither social nor biological. But that aside, this concept of root brain is essentially the concept that in forestation, where they do pool from similar resources, and it's a collaborative kind of a growth system, ecosystem. And so they talk about this versus a 6G world brain. So those who are familiar with Tesla's work, he predicted long before, Edward Leroy and his disciples, Vernadsky and Jourdain talked about a noosphere, or even before H.G. Wells and his world brain, Tesla talked about a wireless world brain. And that when, we didn't have that technology back then. But essentially with 6G, that becomes very much a reality where you could have operating through humans, through human cells, using humans as an antenna to power it, where you would have direct interface to have everything be interconnected and essentially create this world brain. So that to me, and they're doing a lot of studies on it right now. Now, of course, 6G is not slated to be on the scene till 2030, although China is leading the world in the R&D on 6G. And I think that's a lot of what this whole narrative about the AI arms race is actually about, because Trump has talked about 6G. He's demonstrated he doesn't really have a full command of understanding what it actually is, but I think that his ego would love nothing more than to be the 6G president, because he brags about being the 5G president. And if you look at the policy that he created under 5G, it does not limit to 5G. It extends itself to 6G. Now, I don't know, again, I don't have the crystal ball. I don't know how quickly they can speed up, although accelerationism seems to be deregulating everything in its way. So they are doing everything possible to try and get this 6G technology as soon as possible. And if they can do it, and if Trump can get it under his presidency, I think he would be super proud to do it. But all this to say, sorry, it was very long-winded, but that really is where you look at that cryptocurrency and body, activity data patents, and you look at the regulatory infrastructure that's being laid out for cryptocurrency and for these stable coins and the discussion of tokenization. When you start to put that picture together, it does look like, really they can create a cybernetic organism. So if there's ways that we can interrupt that system, because that seems like once you sign up to be a part of that cryptocurrency that has a tokenized aspect where there's some sort of sensor technology interfacing with it. That sounds like the mark of beasts to me. So I don't know the answer, but yeah, I would agree with Patrick. And anything that can be done to slow down that process or interfere, or to be able to opt out of it. I know there are people who don't like the fiat system. They say boycott the dollar. I'm still a fan of using cash where you can, transacting in things that are even a barter system, things that are tangible, because as much as people may be advocating for some of these privacy coins, and I do think their heart is in the right place, and I'm all for ingenuity and creativity, and bless those people who can come up with something that is truly a parallel system. One EMP attack can wipe all that out. And, they're certainly primed to do that. I think, that's not out of the realm of warfare to have EMP wars. So I don't know if I answered it, but I wanted to put some of that out there.
Yeah, and as you say, I guess we'll become the human batteries. So the Bitcoin mining problem is solved. We become the human batteries, like in Matrix or something. And maybe they should just call it 6.66G. I found it funny that Trump administration pulled out of why this number 66 international organizations, right? It's always 33 or 66 6. It's like what it's kind of obvious at this point. And I didn't want to bring up, since you brought up the Borg thing, I've been watching a lot of this sci-fi dystopia just because I'm a fan of it, but Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. I loved I think Australian TV did a great 3-hour adaptation in 2015 of it. And Pluribus now, this new movie, they have the same themes like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where they want to bring in collectivism, right? And create a Borg, like a hive mind, and just take us over. And I keep seeing that theme in these sci-fi films and literature, and I didn't want to mention just before closing out. I've been following this story. Just going to share the screen here, which I think is important. The past few weeks, where they're now talking about taking our computers away from us, which would take, I think, a lot of agency away. And so here, Bezos. So you hear the stories of how RAM and hard drives shortages could last now, they say, months to years. So the price of computers and graphics cards will be the middle class will be priced out of it, and they want us not to have computers anymore. That you would just kind of have, like, I guess, a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, or maybe like a smartphone, and you just log on to Microsoft or Amazon, and on their end they do the computing, and so that would strip away a huge amount of agency, like your ability to produce a book like Final Betrayal or whatnot. And so there's that. And then, this quote from Larry Fink now, who's the head honcho. He said, "We need Davos to be part of everyone's life." How about no? We need you guys to leave us alone, please. And so in your book, as you mentioned, you already mentioned it, you say, technocrats are not invincible. Exploit their vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and blind spots wherever you can. You also say, as we mark the 1-year milestone of the 2024 election, the betrayal is complete. If we don't act now, we risk the republic being supplanted by a machine of control orchestrated by elites like Thiel, Musk, RFK Jr. Awakening to this reality is our last defense, lest we awaken too late in a world where liberty is but a forgotten code. I like that very much. And so, any final thoughts for us?
I don't think so. We covered a lot of stuff. Just remember, going forward, all of your listeners, empire, geopolitics, and empire. Those are the two buzzwords going forward from here.
Yes. I did want to tell you that you brought up the numbers and how it's always 33 and 66. Well, Tether bought out $775 million worth of Rumble. And do you know how many shares that comes to? 103,333,333. Like, what? Yeah. Every time. So yeah, I don't know what that means, but I just thought it was interesting. But yeah, no, I think we covered it, and Yeah, I just like to tell people that, this information can be pretty dark, and I know people can feel like it's blackpilling. I know I don't want to speak for Patrick or for you, but I think we all share the same sentiment that we don't share this information to be a doomer or to be blackpilling. I wouldn't spend this kind of time and energy and investment in sharing the information if I didn't think there were hope for humanity. But I think we can't defeat a threat we don't know exists. And so hopefully if people become more aware, I don't think there's a smoking gun. Everybody wants that one and done kind of solution, the answer. We get asked all the time, like, oh, so what do we do? How do we fight this? And I don't think it's simple, but I also think that everybody plays a different role. We all have unique gifts, strengths, and talents. We all have different passions and resources, and we should use those to be our guide, so that we can do whatever it is that our part and we feel called to do. And I think if everybody does that, maybe we can be at least a thorn in their plans, and that's the hope.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I included this on my socials some weeks back, but in my weekly analysis, which I published yesterday, Nick Hinton, which is an interesting X account, he's Orthodox, but still he quotes Kurt Vonnegut and says, "And how should we behave during this apocalypse? We should be unusually kind to one another, certainly, but we should also stop being so serious. Jokes help a lot. And get a dog if you don't already have one." And there's a great X account called Babylon Singularity. I'll close out with that, where he says, "Placing zero hope in the world and your every hope in the return of Christ is not a black pill. In fact, it's the ultimate white pill." And so all of your links are in the description. Again, I've got the Kindle ebook version of Final Betrayal. By the way, Patrick, I bought your boot camp for $30. I haven't had time to go through it yet, but I'll be going through that. And
Wonderful.
do subscribe to Courtney's, all of her socials, her podcast, and Patrick's newsletter. So thank you, friends, for coming on. I'll be seeing you in the electronic concentration camp. I hope our virtual wards will be near each other. So,
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.